Hi friends, thank you for taking time out of your week to spend a little with me. I appreciate you. This week, our case comes from a fellow YouTube user, so thank you in advance. The case was described by the media as the worst mass killing in Indianapolis history at the time. So, I ask you all to join me as we remember the victims of the Hamilton Avenue murders. Located at 560 Hamilton Avenue in Indianapolis, Indiana, lived a family. Emma Valdez, who was 46, and Alberto Calvarubia Sr., who was 56, shared the home with their sons Alberto Jr. and David. Alberto Jr., who was 11, and David, who was 8, attended school at Thomas D. Gregg School 15. Their teacher described the boys as some of the best kids they'd ever taught. Emma and Alberto Sr. were active members of St. Philip Neri Parish in Indianapolis. They participated in a weekly prayer group and were very involved in their son's school. Living in the upstairs apartment was Emma's older son Magno, age 29. Emma had an older daughter also named Flora, age 22, who did not live in the house. Flora had a young son named Luis, who was 5 years old at the time. The family were well known in the neighborhood, with neighbors referring to them as hardworking, caring, and kind. On June 1, 2006, Flora left her son with his grandmother, Emma, while she ran errands with a friend. Alberto and Emma spent the day with their sons and grandson, while Magno was spending time with his daughter, Jasmine. Per her interview with News, Jasmine, who was 7 at the time, stated that day her father took her to gymnastics practice and dinner before dropping her off at her mother's home. Unbeknownst to them, Magno then headed home to Hamilton Avenue for the very last time. Shortly after 10 p.m., police received a phone call from a neighbor stating multiple gunshots were heard. When police arrived to Hamilton Avenue, the gruesome scene unfolded. Michael Kerman with the Indianapolis Metro Police Department was the first to arrive, where he encountered a hysterical woman in the street. She was pointing at 560 Hamilton, stating, "They're shot." On the ground outside was a wallet belonging to Alberto Sr. Pushing through the front door, the smell of gunfire was still hanging in the air. The house was ransacked, with pulled-out drawers and overturned furniture. Spent shell casings littered the floor. Barely past the entryway, Officer Kerman stumbled upon the first victim. Magno was in the living room just to the right of the entryway. He suffered multiple gunshot wounds. He also had bruising and abrasions on his face. The pattern abrasion on his neck was consistent with the muzzle of a gun. Under his leg was a .357 revolver that had one shot fired from it. In the dining room were both Emma and Alberto Sr., who suffered the same injuries as Magno. Flora was in the kitchen, where she was shot multiple times and had bruises on her forearms. In the back room located off of the kitchen were the 3 boys, Alberto Jr., David, and Luis. All boys were shot multiple times, and they were found on the bed. Police recovered 23 discharged cartridge casings from the scene. It was determined the cartridges accommodated high-velocity bullets often used in assault-type rifles. No weapon of this type was recovered from the scene. To police, this seemed like a burglary gone bad. Upon speaking to bystanders, police learned some key details. Frank D., a family friend and neighbor, watched the series of events from across the street. He explained he saw Flora, who was accompanied by a friend, pull into the driveway of her mother's home. She got out of the car where her friend stayed behind. Flora ran up to the porch where it looked like someone pulled her into the house. He couldn't tell if it was someone messing with her or what it was at the time, but shortly after, 10 or 12 shots were heard, so he called the police. He didn't see anyone leave the house. Flora's friend who was left in the car was also interviewed. She explained when they parked in front of the house, Flora noted the lights were off, which caused her to grow concerned. She got out of the car, ran up to the porch, where she was then snatched into the house. Shortly after Flora was pulled in, Magno arrived. He carried a box of takeout. The friend stated when Magno made it to the porch, he set the food down and reached for something on his side, then entered the house. After his arrival was when the screams and gunshots started. Flora could be heard shouting, "Not my baby." She also yelled at her friend to not come inside. More shots followed this, then silence. The friend and another neighbor claimed a man appeared on the porch with a long gun as shots rang out inside. Shirley H., who lived beside the home, told police that she recognized one of the men as Desmond Turner, who grew up in the area. She explained he was friends with some of the teens in the area, and he spent a lot of time at another friend's house who lived in the neighborhood. One of these teens were also interviewed. He was identified as a 16-year-old boy from the neighborhood. The 16-year-old explained he knew Desmond was planning something, but he wasn't sure what exactly. The night of the murders, the teen explained Desmond showed up in a burgundy truck while himself and a group of boys were outside playing football. The 16-year-old agreed to go to the gas station with him to get a soda. He said on their way back, he told him he was going to grab his boy Lucky and his chopper, which was explained as slang for an assault rifle, and then he would be back to the neighborhood. The boy said Desmond was going to hit a lick on the family down the street, with lick meaning a robbery. The 16-year-old said Desmond made it clear he needed quick cash, and there was a rumor that the family had thousands of dollars and drugs in the house. Desmond returned to the neighborhood with another man around 9:45 p.m. The men were then seen parking that same truck in the alleyway next to the house at 5:60 and watched as they approached the porch. Both men had weapons, with one having a handgun and Desmond the assault rifle. Their faces were concealed. Other teens who witnessed the beginning of the crime were interviewed, who also identified as Desmond as one of the men. The men then knocked on the door, and when it opened, they forced their way inside. Desmond's accomplice was seen through an upstairs window tossing things around. The boys then explained shortly after that the older children arrived, and shots were fired. The two masked men ran out of the front door and made their way into the truck. As the tires squealed, neighbors dialed 911. Desmond Turner was no stranger to law enforcement. In fact, they classified him as a violent offender. He'd just finished a 3.5-year stint in prison 6 months prior on drug and weapon charges. Prior to this charge, he was previously arrested for resisting law enforcement, possession of cocaine, carrying a firearm without a license, and criminal recklessness. His accomplice was later identified by another as James Stewart. Police believe James and Desmond likely were not far from the area, since Desmond grew up here and James grew up in a neighborhood nearby. An extensive search was conducted, with police applying pressure to the public to keep their eyes peeled and push for anyone to not house or protect them from police. When trying to establish a connection to the family and the assailants, none could be made. According to neighbors, they had no known enemies, and they just went to work and kept to themselves. It was also determined no large amounts of money or drugs were found in the home. Relatives, neighbors, friends, and authorities gathered for a memorial service in front of the home. The sidewalk was decorated with angel statues, candles, flowers, ribbons, and stuffed animals as a tribute. The manhunt for Desmond, who was the prime suspect, gripped the city for 2 days, while James Stewart was caught fairly easily. A friend of James spoke to police the night after the murders and explained he confessed to her everything that happened at 560 Hamilton Avenue. James Stewart was apprehended the afternoon of June 2nd after a traffic stop. Once in custody, James was interviewed about that night. James explained he agreed to help Desmond with the robbery, but he had no intentions of it going the way it did. Once inside the home, James went upstairs to search for a safe, while Desmond controlled the occupants. Upstairs he found nothing, so he returned to the main level, where he encountered Desmond being held at gunpoint by another male. This male was identified as Magno. James fired his gun at Magno, and his bullet struck him. Desmond, according to James, then started shooting everybody. Desmond rampaged through the house, and James pleaded with him to not hurt the kids, which did not work. After the murders, James and Desmond fled the scene and went separate ways. He explained he went to his girlfriend's house for shelter. He told her he'd gotten himself into some trouble and he was at the wrong place at the wrong time. James told her just between the two of them, Desmond and himself were responsible for a handful of murders, but it was only because they mistakenly thought this family had a stash of cash and drugs. The day after James's arrest, Desmond Turner surrendered himself. On June 3rd, shortly before 7 p.m., Desmond, accompanied by family members, turned himself over to police at a Hardee's restaurant. He was placed under arrest without incident. Desmond told reporters and media outlets that he wasn't responsible and there was more to the story than what was being portrayed. Deputy Chief Tim Foley claimed Desmond only turned himself in because he had nowhere else to turn. When Desmond was interviewed, he shared the same series of events as James. After dropping James off, he took the truck back to the house of its owner, where he crashed for the night. The next morning, he woke up to the news that he was a wanted man. He took the clothes he wore during the murders and placed them in the bathtub, where they soaked in a mixture of peroxide, alcohol, and lotion. Desmond then asked his friend to drive him to Kentucky, so they did. The group made it to Kentucky, and Desmond wanted them to push on to Alabama, but they decided against it and returned back to Indianapolis. After coming back, Desmond decided to turn himself in. Once arrested, Desmond's friend's house was searched, where the previously mentioned clothes were discovered along with bullets that belonged to Desmond. The shirt Desmond used as a cover-up for his face was also found in the vehicle. Both James and Desmond faced over 24 charges, including murder, confinement, burglary, and robbery, 1 count for each charge per victim. Prosecution planned to seek the death penalty against them. The state decided to put Desmond and James on trial separately due to witness statements implicating both defendants. Desmond's was arranged to go first. The original plan was to seek the death penalty, but they refrained from doing so when Desmond gave up his right to a jury trial, instead choosing a trial by judge. Desmond was found guilty on all counts against him in October of 2009. He was sentenced on November 20th, 2009 to life in prison without parole plus 88 years. James Stewart's jury trial was scheduled for December 2nd, 2009. James' trial was a bit more complicated for the prosecution. They had a hard time tying James to the crime scene since physical evidence didn't exist. There were also contradictory testimonies from witnesses that claimed James admitted to the crime, while others provided him an alibi and placed him at a different location at the time of the crime. Ultimately, it was up to the jury to decide. James Stewart was found guilty on all counts against him. On January 6, 2010, he was sentenced to 425 years in prison. James did not receive a capital conviction due to not having the evidence needed to meet the standard of proof. Both Desmond and James have attempted appeals, with Desmond receiving no reduction and James receiving 4 years off of his sentence when his robbery conviction was overturned. When asked about the outcome of the trial, the family of the victims were pleased with the outcome. They felt dropping the death penalty was fine since they didn't agree with it to begin with. They stated they didn't have the right to take a life and they were not like them. The family members felt killing them would bring no sense of joy. It won't bring their family back or even ease their pain because in the end, their families lost someone too. Currently, Desmond Turner is serving his sentence at a prison outside of Indiana, while James Stewart is incarcerated at Wabash Valley Correctional Facility in Carlisle, Indiana. Alberto Sr.'s funeral was held at St. Mary's Catholic Church in downtown Indianapolis, while Emma, Magno, Flora, Alberto Jr., David, and Luis's funeral mass was held at St. Peter and Paul's Cathedral. Alberto Sr. was laid to rest at the Washington Park East Cemetery, while the remaining family members were laid to rest in Mexico. On August 23, 2008, 560 Hamilton Avenue was set on fire in an arson attack. On July 16, 2010, the house was demolished. Hi friends, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. As always, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts, so leave them below and we can chat about this case. If you found this to be informative, please consider giving the video a thumbs up to let YouTube know you want more from me. And lastly, if you're not subscribed yet, you should because we would love to have you under the ash tree. I want to take a quick moment to apologize to the individual who suggested this case. Somehow I lost your comment where it was suggested, and I always like to shout you all out whenever you point me into the direction of a case. So if it was you, please reach out to me so I can credit you correctly. I do appreciate you taking the time to send me the suggestion, so thank you again. And thank you to everyone else for tuning in and showing your support. I always appreciate it, each and every one of you. You don't have to show up, and you do, and I just thank you so much. I hope you have a great week ahead of you, because you deserve it. But for now, we must part ways. So stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, friends!